Welcome everybody, this is the SharePoint Patterns and Practices webcast. And this time we're going to talk about how to use modern web stack development within the SharePoint on-premises deployments. So something slightly different from our typical setup of webcasts and more concentrating on the on-premises sites. And there are reasons for that, and we're going to walk them through together with Waldek. So my name is Vesa Juvonen, I'm a Senior Program Manager from SharePoint Engineering side, and with me as my lovely sidekick is this time is Waldek. So Waldek will do my intros as well.
Your intros.
your intros.
Right. Yes. So hi everybody. My name is Waldek Masikas. I am an MVP. I work at Rancor, and today I'll be your dev dude.
Absolutely.
And the lovely assistant, yeah.
Yeah. We're always switching the roles between Waldek. So this time I'm actually going to do the demo for this one, which is pretty rare. Typically it's Waldek, but I'll let Waldek actually ask the questions when we go through the presentation. But before we go to the actual contents, just to quickly clarify, SharePoint Patterns and Practices is an open source initiative coordinated by SharePoint Engineering, but we work together with MVPs and the community to share the best practices and guidance and reusable components and samples for others to reuse. So the themings are on the SharePoint framework, SharePoint add-ins, Microsoft Graph, Office 365 APIs development, and remote provisioning and remote APIs in general. AKMS, SharePoint PnP, is the one address what you want to remember. We have all of the webcasts, all of the resources, and way too many resources actually on that location. But that's a different challenge. So today, like mentioned, we're going to talk about modern web stack development, and we wanted to actually start by explaining what is modern web stack development. So first of all, these are kind of three pillars which we came up with. What does the modern web stack development actually means? It means that you're using open source tooling. So you're using stuff like the Node.js, Yeoman generators, Gulp as your build or task tool, and so on. It is a cross-platform development as well. So you can actually do development in Windows or in Linux or in Mac. So in our case, as an example, Waldek is using a Mac. I'm always using a Windows machine. And it's a matter of a preference. So the technology isn't actually limiting factor. And the modern web stack is kind of an industry standard as well. We're more and more heading to this direction among the web's development. So when you have a look on the internet around the web development, more and more stuff is heading to this similar kind of a direction. So it absolutely can be considered as an industry standard as well. Anything we want to add there, actually, Waldek? So
no, you have it all.
Thank you. So
hit it.
What does it mean? What does this actually mean in practice? So what does it mean that we want to use web stack development or the modern web stack development within on-premises? So first of all, let's be clear on this. SharePoint framework is actually using a modern web stack development, but you can do modern web stacks development without the SharePoint framework as well. And the SharePoint framework will be released on SharePoint 2016 during the calendar year of 2017. So it will first go live within the SharePoint Online. When we're recording this webcast, it was still in developer preview, and then it will go live pretty soon in the GA for SharePoint Online. Then during 2017, it's going to land on premises as well, and explicitly for SharePoint 2016. Even though SharePoint framework isn't in on-premises, you can actually align on the development thinking already today. So you can actually take advantage of the open source tooling, of the open source libraries, open source communities, and the way of doing development already today. And that's really what we want to kind of pinpoint today. You do not have to wait for SharePoint framework to be present in on-premises to be able to start using and aligning your way of doing development for the future of SharePoint as well. And kind of clearly pinpointing this one out as well. So SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2016, they actually have a pretty similar API surface, meaning that you're using the CSAM, explicitly actually REST when you're doing a web stack development, but they have a pretty similar remote API surface. If you're using an older version of SharePoint, like 2010 or 2007, theoretically, you can actually take advantage of the web stack in those deployments as well. But whatever you would be implementing, if it would be talking against SharePoint, in the case of SharePoint 2010 as an example, the communication channels, or in 2007, 2010-2007, the communication channels towards SharePoint would be different. In 2010, you would be using ASMX web services, or the classic, the first level of a REST implementation, VTI bin. REST, was it VTI bin, Waldek? What was it?
Yeah, that was in the list data.
List data, yes, absolutely, list data SVC. And then in 2007, you would be using the ASMX, essentially web services, as the reference. And then if you would do that whenever you're moving to a newer version of SharePoint, you would have to obviously change that particular implementation. But in SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2016, the REST API surface is pretty much the same. There are certain differences, additional things in SharePoint Online, additional things in 2016 comparing to 2013, but the implementation style is exactly the same. So you can take advantage of the web stack development in 2013, 2016, and aligning already on the way, for example, if you're migrating the SharePoint Online, your customization today. And that's really the key purpose of this webcast as well. Show you in practice, what does it mean, pinpoint the opportunity. It doesn't mean that you have to do that, but we want to make sure that people are aware of this option as well. Me rambling quite a lot. Waldek, anything you want to add on this one?
Oh yeah, so an interesting point that you hit a bit is that with this approach, you actually you don't need to wait to start using the patterns that we will use in a cloud soon in production, right? Because if you are in 2007 or 2010, I mean, you could wait for a really long time, but framework will not be available there.
True.
However, that does not mean that you can really align already with what might be a reality for you one day when you either upgrade on premises or move to the cloud, right? So you can already start doing exactly the same approach, even if you work in 2007 or 2010.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you might be wondering, okay, what does it actually mean? A few slides, a lot of us chit-chatting. So let's actually have a look on this. So what does it actually mean that we're using a modern web stack within modern web stack development within on-premises? In this case, we're going to use SharePoint 2016. The experience is almost identical. It is actually identical with SharePoint 2013. If we go to the older versions, then the API surface is completely different, and actually the capabilities on the UI side is slightly different. This sample is available from the github.com/SharePoint/spdevsamples in the spdevsamples repository. And like mentioned quite a few times, this is not SharePoint framework. This is how do we do modern web stack development in on-premises without SharePoint framework. But let's actually have a look on this one in practice. What does it mean? What's the benefits? How do we actually get started? What's the tooling what we use? And then let's come back on the slides in a second. Good. So let's actually get started on the demo side, and this is something what we prepared and which is also downloadable for you from a GitHub as well. So you will find the links and everything else from the video notes. But let's first have a look on how this actually works. So in my case, I've already downloaded the sample and the setup, and I've actually installed the Node.js. So I'm running actually an American version of the keyboard. So let me find if I can find the right characters. There we go. So in my case, I'm running Node.js 6.9 in the machine, which is one of the requirements. And then after that, installing, running the npm install to get the stuff actually installed on the machine. In this case, all of this has been done because the npm install does take slightly longer. So we're not going to do that. And then what I'm going to do is then I'm going to start the Visual Studio Code. So we can quickly have a look on the solution itself. How is it built and what does it actually do? It actually popped up immediately the web part, but let me actually quickly explain what we have here. So the setup is pretty similar as with typical SharePoint framework setup as well. So this is kind of mimicking the similar situation. So we do have the source folder, we do have the components. This is where we actually have the fellow which will be rendered, and that might have then properties, it might have then stylings and all of that, and it's then actually rendered as an HTML. Yep.
Yeah, so this seems a lot like SPFX.
Yes, this does seem quite a lot like SPFX, but it's not SharePoint framework. So what we're doing here is that we are using the TypeScript. We're using well, in this case, we're using React, and then the way we have set up the necessarily Webpack settings that when we compile, when we do git serve, it will actually serve the stuff. When you do updates on the code, it will refresh the page or refresh the JavaScript which is compiled from the TypeScript. Hopefully that did make sense as well.
Yeah, so in other words, you can use similar developer flow as you would use in SPFX, right?
Exactly, precisely. So the experience is exactly the same. And what we mean with that one is that, well, in this case, because this is not a SharePoint framework, we can actually test the functionality itself first within our solution. And this one is built in a way that the web part, or in this case, in quotes, the web part, is actually resolving these kind of diff definitions, which have a web part script example as the class, and then it's going to actually read this parameterizable entry from the element as well. And what we mean with the similar kind of a tooling as with SharePoint framework is that I can actually go now and do gulp serve, and we can actually see the functionality in practice. In our case, if I switch back on the here, we can see that we should have two, in quotes, web parts, and the first one should have whatever we want, and the second one to have does it work. And let's see when the gulp serve will be actually compiling. And essentially what happens here is that we're starting the Node.js to host our website, in quotes, and it's going to actually spin up a browser as well. There's certain TS-lint warnings there, certain other things which we can address later on, but the overall setup works pretty seamlessly. If it would actually start the browser. So let's see. Every now and then there are some compilation delays, and in this case what I'm doing is that we have a SharePoint 2016 hosted within a Microsoft Azure, which is now the one which is actually hosting the functionality. And what will happen is
it actually works. It seems like it's already there.
Yeah. So let me actually get that URL, or most likely it is actually already opened up in here. Yes, it is.
Yes.
Well, just didn't notice that. So this is what we actually got. Yeah, it was so fast, too fast. So this is what we essentially got. So we got two different, in quotes, web parts, which both of them have a unique parameterized entry, which is then visible within the UI. Okay.
Yeah, so actually what we see here is an HTML page on your local web server that shows two part components embedded on a page.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Correct. So, and really the key point here is that the setup itself understands when we're doing any modifications. So if I come here and I do welcome to SharePoint PnP, and let's save that. What will happen is that actually the Webpack itself will recognize that, hey, there was a change within the code. So I will refresh my JavaScript and I will recompile, and if I come here we can actually see the change on real time. So I can do that one more time side by side. So let's actually do this, and let's put that one there, and let's put that one there, and now let's do a small modification because we're going to go to SharePoint 2016 in a second. I'm going to switch that back on to SharePoint 2016, save. We can see that the the setup is actually recognizing the change, and voila, we have a refresh. We can actually see the change immediately reflected in the UI. And that was audience clapping. Yay!
Yes, that was an applause.
Yes. So, now, how do we actually use this within the SharePoint Online then? Not SharePoint Online, in our SharePoint deployment. So let's actually move into the SharePoint 2016 hosted within the same machine as well. And what I want to do is that I actually want to add a script editor web part on this page. So I'm going to go insert, I'm going to do a web part, I'm going to do a media and content and script editor and add. And then we need to add the actual certain scripts on the page. And let's have a look on what are we adding there in a second. So now I'm going to switch back on the Visual Studio Code, and let's have a look on what did we have on that HTML index HTML page. So what we have here is that we are referencing the Fabric style sheet, and then we're referencing certain JavaScript files, because in this case we are actually using, or we have a dependency on the React. We could actually reference them directly from CDN. That's absolutely a possibility as well. And then we are actually referencing our compiled, in quotes, JavaScript file from the dist folder. So whenever I'm doing a change, I will save, and that will actually regenerate this React app.js file to the dist folder.
So from these scripts and references, what do you have to embed or include on a page per web part, and what do you do once per page?
Yes. So in this particular case, this is kind of a mixture of two things. The web part implementation itself is the React app.js. So this is the one customization in here, what we can see. The React.js and DOM are actually React libraries. But this is actually also generic. And what we mean with that one is that in this particular case, it is actually recognizing div with a class with a certain class, and then it actually goes and makes that one particular instance unique based on this parameterization. So it means that if I want, I can reference these only one time in the page, for example, using user custom action, or reference in a one separate script editor web part, and then only put this one in a separate script editor web part. And I could have multiple of them in the page and it would still work. For the simplicity of the demo, we've actually included the script editor txt file in here, which is essentially using the exact same settings and exact same URLs. So I can just copy this one, and I can switch back on my browser and paste that one to my script editor web part and do insert. And essentially what we're doing is that an OK, and we still need to do save, and in the best case scenario we can actually see the change in the UI, and as we can. Now what we're doing is that we are referencing essentially the JavaScript files which are now hosted from our Node.js hosted in my local host. Hopefully that kind of made sense in certain level. But what it also
and I guess that's so is it exactly the same as in SPFX that you can have, or you can host them wherever you want? So you could
yes.
You could upload them to your site, you could upload them to Azure, CDN, whatever you like.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. You could actually put those JavaScript files anywhere you want, host them from there directly. But from a development experience perspective, you probably don't want to do that, because you want to have that connectivity pointing to the files which are right now hosted from your local box. So I can actually do welcome to, what do we want to call, welcome to Seattle, and save that one. Now, before I save that, I can show that one side by side. So obviously the save itself will be refreshed or recognized once again by the setup. It's going to recompile the file to the dist folder. The problem is that SharePoint itself obviously isn't aware of this change. So the SharePoint, the browser itself doesn't refresh automatically. But what we can do in here is quickly do an F5, and after that we can actually see the change because it's hosting from my local host that JavaScript file which have been refreshed. So I can actually pretty easily do then development in the context of SharePoint as well.
Cool. So you mentioned a few times that it is web part in quotes. What does that mean? So is it a web part or not?
Yes. So technically, that's a fair question, and a question what people might be asking about watching this. So the reason why I don't want to call this as a web part is that this is not really a SharePoint framework. Once again, we are just using the web stack, the modern web stack, in the context of the on-premises, and we're referencing the JavaScript files directly from the script editor web part. This is not really a web part as such. But then on the other hand, if you think about it, yes, it's a script editor web part. It references JavaScript files which are hosted somewhere else. So it's kind of a web part as well. So once again, it's kind of a debatable discussion. It's not a web part in the context of SharePoint framework because we're not using SharePoint framework in here, but it's a web part in the context of SharePoint because, hey, it is a web part. If I go to this page and if I edit this, I can still do all of the typical modifications for that web part. The only
okay. Go.
No, the only thing, kind of one of the key advantages obviously when you're using SharePoint framework, which is available only in SharePoint Online and then during calendar year 2017 in SharePoint 2016 as well, is that there's the custom property pane experience, and that's no doubt something what is missing within this kind of a setup. So if I go here, I cannot actually parameterize.
So that was exactly the thing that I wanted to ask, whether you are able to set parameters in UI or whether the only way to do that for you is in code, and which is exactly what you said. You can only do that in code, right? So you have to go back to the markup that you have, and in there we can see parameters that you pass into your code.
Yes. So in this particular case, what do we actually have? There we have the div. Essentially, as part of this div, we do have this one parameterization, which is the text bottom actually visible. So I can flip this here to say, hello from a modern web stack. Modern web stack development. And that will be then reflected. And let's click the insert, and that will be then reflected within the UI. So that's essentially the way to parameterize them. It's not really end-user friendly way of doing that, and that's really one of the key benefits out of SharePoint framework then within the SharePoint Online.
Right.
Cool. I think that's it. We went through the kind of a development stack, and then obviously if you haven't followed up on the development, how to get started on SharePoint framework, please go and have a look on those, because the tooling is exactly the same. We're using the Node.js, we're using the NPM, we're using the gulp within this kind of a setup as well. So getting started on understanding that tooling, you can actually use the SPFX as getting started tutorials as well. But I think that's it. Let's flip back on the slides and talk slightly more about the topics and close up the webcast. Now, coming back on the slides, let's go through a few slides and pinpoint a few different areas still, and then close up the webcast. So, like you could see in the demo, what we were doing is that we're using the script editor web part to host your JavaScript from your local machine, so that you're able to do development within your local machine, and then you're able to refresh and see the changes within the UI. The scenario was pretty simple. So we were just essentially using the Office UI fabric to render a nicely looking UI there, and it didn't actually have that much complexity from a functionality perspective. But it really shows the modern way of utilizing the tooling and doing then development using the web stack in on-premises as well. Like mentioned before the demo, you can do this in the SharePoint 2013 environment as well, which is pretty much identical experience as with the SharePoint 2016. You would be using the script editor web part as well. Now, if you would go further down on the historical journey, you can theoretically use the same model in SharePoint 2010 as well. We didn't have a script editor web part at the time, so you would have to use a content editor web part. And it only works in a way that you actually create a TXT file or a file where you have to embed your script, and then in the content editor web part you point that web part to render that file. That way you can actually have the scripts embedded on the page without any problems. But like mentioned in SharePoint 2010, the API surface, or in 2007, is completely different. So if you're looking into kind of moving into this direction, and then, hey, if I do my stuff, implement them now using the modern web stack, I don't need to do anything and it will work in the future in SharePoint 2016 or in SharePoint Online. That's not really the case because the APIs are completely different. So my personal preference, or how would I put it, recommendation would be maybe looking into this way of doing stuff if you are in SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2016, not necessarily if you're in older versions. On the other hand, why not? If you are really into this model, it does work within the older versions as well. But the APIs are slightly different. What's your take on that, Waldek, by the way? I
would actually say that no matter where you are, so whether you are in 2007, 10, or newer, I would actually say that that's a good way to build the web parts or build the things that you do. Because, as you said, it allows you to prepare what's going to be available in the cloud soon. And another interesting thing is that when you build web parts that way, one thing that you would want to do is you would want to isolate how you get the data in order to be able to test the web parts, right? Because when you build them, you might build them not directly in your site.
Sure.
So with that, you might start doing your work with a mock and then move that to SharePoint.
Yeah.
At that point, if you have the data access separate from the UX, it will be easier for you to switch from 2007, 2010 to the new APIs, because the only part that you will need to replace is actually the API calls, and that's a separate thing already.
True.
So with that, I can actually say that even if you work on 2007, 2010, that will be an interesting thing for you to look at and to see how that would fit everything that you build today.
Yep, absolutely. And one thing also to notice here is that even though we showed the demo using a kind of a script editor web part, embedded script editor web part, you can actually use the same stack if you're using user custom actions, or if you're using any other JavaScript extensibility point in SharePoint. So you can absolutely do the same development style with those endpoints as well. Good. So we kind of gone through and having a discussion on this one already, but let's kind of sum up the let's say the recommendations or the why would you use a web stack. Well, obviously it simplifies migration to SharePoint framework in the future. So if you are looking into, if your on-premises deployment is heading to SharePoint 2016, or you're looking into moving to SharePoint Online, or you might even not know about it yet, but it's still the future of development in SharePoint. So you would be more easily adaptable the same way of doing development as with the SharePoint framework. You would actually learn and use the same technical stack across different versions. And this has been kind of a promise of the future for many years already in SharePoint. Write once and it actually works in all of the environments. Sure, there are some differences within the remote APIs in on-premises and in SharePoint Online, and that's on us and on our side, which is causing some challenges. But technically, you can use this exactly the same process and development model in on-premises and in SharePoint Online. In SharePoint Online, you would gain additional benefits out of the SharePoint framework and additional development experience improvements. But the development stack, the actual technical stack, is exactly the same. And it is around consolidation of your technical implementation and aligning those to industry standards. So once again, moving away, how would we put it, SharePoint isms to a model where the SharePoint is just a data source for your implementation. So you don't actually need to have, let's say, a deep down understanding of SharePoint internals. As long as you're a web stack developer, you can actually do this. Or if you are a SharePoint developer, this way you will learn how to be also non-SharePoint developer, which is a massive advantage as well. So, which is a good thing, no doubt.
Yeah. And one thing that that I am interested in is if you would think about migrating the web part that you have built in the demo on premises in a non-SPFX environment to move it to SPFX. Do you know what the effort would be?
Well, in this case, the web part itself is such a super simplistic thing. So the effort itself would be super minimal. Even though it would be something complex like Angular or React-based real application which have actions and functionalities in it, technically, you can take that application and host it in SharePoint framework relatively fast. And we do have those webcasts available in the SharePoint PnP guidance as well, which are showing how to do that. So how can you take an existing JavaScript implementation and put it in, host it in SharePoint framework without any changes? And then the follow-up thing would be, okay, how would I actually then evolve this to be more natively part of the SharePoint framework? So
cool.
Obviously depends, but in this case it would be a matter of minutes. But if it's a complex case, I wouldn't say that's a matter of maybe hours. Again, depends on the scenario, though. Absolutely.
Right.
Cool. What would you need to get started? So you would have to install the let's say the similar tooling as for the SharePoint framework. So that's Node.js and the typical other web stack tooling for development. We're gonna reference these in the video notes as well. Then you would probably start with some sort of a starter kit solution, which essentially what we mean with that one is that some sort of a template which will have the automatic refreshing of the files and compilation for Webpacks and all of that. So you can just concentrate on the implementation. When you save the changes, it will recompile or transpile the TypeScript to a JavaScript, and then you're good to go. You would probably want to choose JavaScript library for your customization, and with that one I mean that you would choose, do I want to use Angular, do I want to use React, and you probably want to be pretty consistent with that one. And the reason why you probably want to be pretty consistent on that one is pretty simple. If you would add multiple these kind of customizations to your site and they're using random frameworks from here and there and there and there, you would be downloading a lot of stuff when you're landing on the page. If you are consistently using Angular or React as an example, you would be loading those libraries only once from the CDN, and then you're good to go. And we have a lot of additional information on using the JavaScript files from CDN and not bundling them in and all of that, but that's a different topic. Let's not even start that discussion. And one kind of an interesting scenario or additional dimension on this one is that you can do this development remotely. So you don't actually have to have every developer doesn't have to have a dedicated SharePoint server to do this kind of a development. It's absolutely true that it might be that it will be some of the same developers who are then doing some level of a server-side development for your on-premises, because every now and then that's still required. Then maybe it does make sense to have a dedicated SharePoint server. But if you do only have dedicated developers for the UI, those people don't necessarily need to have a dedicated developer box. They can actually just share one box and do this kind of a development with a limited set of tooling, or how would I put it, software and hardware requirements, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's pretty much sums up the webcast. And one more time, we've mentioned this quite a few times. SharePoint Framework is going to land only in SharePoint Online and SharePoint 2016. So obviously we're never going to say never to any other versions, but this is the current plan. And so if you're using SharePoint 2010, 2007, 2013, you can still do modern web stack development, but that's not SharePoint Framework. SharePoint Framework is also using modern web stack as the model, but it actually further enhances and gives you additional benefits when you're using that as the model within the SharePoint Online or within SharePoint 2016. And for SharePoint 2016, it's going to land during the calendar year 2017, and that's the current plan. Want to be super clear on that, that everybody gets that. Huge. I think that sums up the webcast. Anything you want to add, Waldek, on the topic?
Yeah, sure. So if you are developing things on premises, I would encourage you to check out the projects, give it a try. And we'd love to hear from you to what extent that would support you in things that you are doing now, and to what extent there are things that you would like to see that are not available in there. So in other words, gaps that prevent you from building things that you need today in your environment on premises.
Yeah. So, and that's a really good point. So what kind of guidance, what kind of samples you would need to have to be able to adapt this kind of a model? Because I think everybody who's watching the webcast clearly understands that maybe, well, it is beneficial to actually do that to align with the future direction. Now, the question is, how do we help you guys in the community side to adapt the model, and what do you need? So what kind of samples, what kind of guidance, what kind of videos, what are the gaps which we need to address? And that's really, really super interesting. So please let us know using the social media and community channels for that. But please have a try, and hopefully it works out fine for you. And don't be ashamed of asking assistance, for example, in the Microsoft Tech communities. That's how we learn. So good stuff. But thank you everybody for joining, and we'll come up with a new webcast sooner or later. Bye-bye.
Bye.